Okay, welcome everybody. I got thrown into this with a short notice, so I don't really have very much to say to start. Anyway, it's not my duty here. My duty is really only to overlook this. I'm Alan Palmer. I'm a captain of a wooden brig, the Tre Kronor, in Stockholm. We work a lot with environmental issues in the Baltic. But now our speakers here are guests from overseas and more used to open waters and deeper waters and saltier waters than I am. But if there's time afterwards, I'd like to say a few words about what we are working with as well. So, Brian and Joshua. Brian starts with a short speech, and then you take over after that. Welcome, everybody. Being filmed. That's why there was all this hassle with the microphones. So don't say anything stupid.
Okay. Yep. So hello everybody. My name is Brian. I am the U.S. representative on the Youth Council. And I think we can all agree that all of us have a certain love for the ocean. That is why we go sailing, and that's why we spend a lot of our time on the ocean or other waterways. So a while ago, the FEE, Foundation for Environmental Education, came up with the Blue Flag Scheme. It was a movement to get, or promote educational awareness about the environment, mainly for our beaches, marinas, and boats. The Youth Council is a big supporter of Blue Flag. And that's because, besides representing the youth we have now, we're also representing the youth in the next generations to come. And, we want the oceans to be the same or better than they are now. So a few issues currently in the going on in the oceans and other major waterways is about 600,000 plastic containers get dumped into the ocean every day. And, plastic is, of course, the biggest part of pollution biggest factor in the oceans. Also, oil can harm oxygen-producing phytoplankton, and about 70% of the Earth's oxygen comes from our oceans. Also, rogue nets can entangle sea life. And also, you put all this together and it can be a hazard to navigation as well and other boaters. So this is the pollution defined by the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. But I think to sum it up, I would have to quote a biology teacher that I had, and really what pollution is it's putting more outputs that just cannot be used into an area or an environment. And, with energy like oil and plastics and waste, that would be what is kind of going into the oceans. So the development of Blue Flag, it was started in 1985. It was introduced in France, and then it kind of spread in 2001 with the introduction of South Africa. 2009, when Sawgrace joined Blue Flag, and STI heard about it through them. And STI later went on to develop the Blue Flag scheme for sail training vessels. And we thought that since sail training is already an education-based platform, promoting environmental education could easily fit in. Currently, there are about 58 countries with the blue flag status, and there are more than 40 sail training vessels registered to blue flag, with Tre Kronar Stockholm being the latest one.
Well, we have had the blue flag since 98.
Okay, so they're the...
Not the STI blue flag, but a national one.
So Sail Training International developed the blue flag scheme with the FEE to make it suitable for sail training vessels. We also developed a code of conduct, and as I said previously, the blue flag is supported by the Youth Council. What is expected? Never throw anything overboard. That can be a little tricky at times because you always think of your food waste. But a usual rule of thumb that I always like to consider is if it came from the sea, it can go back in the sea. Do not release toilet water into the sea near coastal waters or sensitive areas. This, when you're traveling across ocean, sometimes that's hard. But the big thing is it's just, make sure you give a lot of room in between the shore. I think most countries have a 3 nautical mile limit. I know we do in the United States as far as dumping black water. And then do not buy or use objects made from the protected species or from archaeological underwater findings. Again, it's promoting environmentalism. Try and use products that are safe for our oceans. And the biggest thing, since this is an educational workshop, is encourage others to take care of our marine environment. I think one thing you can look at it as you're encouraging participation through demonstration. There's a bigger list of rules, like the well-defined requirements for the blue flag scheme, that is on the STI website if you would like to look at that. This is a brochure, or sorry, not the brochure, the membership form that you will fill out for your vessel. It's pretty simple. Just go through, I think, as far as I know, you just fill in the paper and go over what your vessel does to meet these requirements, and I think you will get the blue flag. Again, here's the certificate, and here's the flag. And you will all be presented with the blue flag and certificate and a few other educational resources that you can use on your ship. So a few things what you can do as far as ideas. Again, this is an educational based program. So we thought of, keep a log of what comes in and what goes out. And the big thing is, you have trainees on board, so involve your trainees, make them aware of what you are taking on your ship and what goes out. Organize a recycling system. I know a lot of ships already do that. Again, go back, it came from the sea, I can go back in the sea. As far as throwing, if you really do have to throw stuff overboard for health reasons, as far as garbage and bio-waste, usually food products, cut it up as small as you can, speed up the breaking down process. Educate your crews and trainees about the consequences of what you put into the water. Another thing to do is coordinate with ports and ensure your ship waste is disposed of properly. I think Josh will talk about that in a little bit. And then be conscious of where you are anchoring and where you are sailing. avoid fishing grounds, and avoid damage to the sea bottom when you anchor. Something I discussed with Paul prior to giving this presentation was, I asked him that, would it be possible if STI can now make an effort to avoid popular fishing grounds, and so the races will, from now on, at least Paul is going to make an effort to avoid popular fishing grounds, so it'll be a little easier for you guys too. I'm going to wait a little bit on the questions. If you have questions, please ask them after Josh.
I know that tall ship race that went through the Great Lakes this last summer, there was a tremendous commitment by the cities, Cleveland, Chicago, and Erie, and the like, that were making that commitment to the festival grounds and the practices they were using. So I'm going to start off by thank you, Brian, for introducing the Blue Flag Scheme. I had the chance to talk with Brian and Paul Bishop in Erie this last February in a conversation about the Blue Flag Scheme and some of the work that we're doing with the Schooner Adventurers. In that February, that was the first week of February, went back to Port Townsend, Washington, in the Seattle area, the Pacific Northwest. An unusually clear day, the ship hauled out. I had the incredible honor, privilege, and responsibility to buy the $200 bottle of single malt Scotch whiskey to celebrate the Adventurous' 100th birthday. The ship was hauled out, and we had just completed the largest restoration phase in the complete hull restoration of the ship. And we stood up with a team of shipwrights and volunteers, planners, and supporters with a toast of whiskey for the ship, as we had just fastened in the last plank, 2,000 lineal feet of planking we had replaced that last winter. And we gave a toast to the ship, looking forward to its next century of sailing. And we spoke quite intentionally about how we continue to use this ship, a National Historic Landmark, 100-year-old ship, that's been engaged, inspiring and empowering an inclusive community for at least the last 25 years while our organization has owned the ship, and how to protect our marine environment. And so that kind of starts our conversation for this afternoon, where blue meets green, and how we use the Schooner Adventurous, this 100-year-old ship, as a platform for engaging the thousands of people that come sailing aboard her each year, and specifically engaging the more broad maritime industry in emerging, resilient, sustainable green technology on board. And it's been a really incredible story. Now, start just real quickly a little bit about the ship. 40-meter, 133-foot schooner, gaff topsail schooner. She was launched in 1913 in East Boothbay Harbor, Maine. B.B. Crowninshield design is kind of a cross between a Gloucester fishing schooner and a yacht. Young aristocrat had the ship built. What's interesting to note, her original interior included a standard gasoline engine and a generator with electric lights. So for 1913, that's emerging technology. And we'd like to say that she's one of the world's first hydrants. Her maiden voyage brought her on an Arctic expedition. The goal was to find a bowhead whale specimen for the American Museum of Natural History. It was a joint venture between the museum and John Borden. It was an unsuccessful trip in that they were late. It was an early winter. I don't know if folks know the story of the Carla. It was also on that Arctic exploration, was ahead of Adventurous, got through the Bering Strait and was iced in. The ship was lost and many of its crew, I think 3 out of the dozen or so, survived. Adventurous turned back to the Pribilof Islands and was sold to the San Francisco bar pilots. And she worked as a bar pilot schooner in San Francisco, 1914 to 1939, actively sailing as a bar pilot. And you'll notice, just for the sake of thinking about history and how we look to our rooted history, you'll notice that her rig was significantly reduced. Bowsprit, Marconi rig was put in. We went from sailing with a large crew to 4 or so pilots and folks, mostly just stationed off of the Golden Gate waiting for ships to come back and forth. World War II came and the ship was conscripted by the U.S. Navy to patrol the coast. She earned 5 chevrons from the Secretary of the Navy, one for each 6 months of service. and was then used as motor vessels came in to FAT, as bar pilots were then used for sail training, Navy, Coast Guard, and Sea Scouts. The ship was brought to Seattle in 1952, changed hands a couple of times, and began her life as a sail training vessel. Again, you can notice a number of the different iterations of the rig and the deck layout. These were some awful years. We call that the school bus up on deck. It was rough. Ernestine Bennett, the woman up here in the corner, brought a group of Girl Scouts on in the early 60s and fell in love with the ship. She moved up into the Seattle area and invested much of her life and money into restoring the ship and continuing sail training. So one of the early sail training vessels. Her and famed schooner Captain Adrian Renault brought the ship back to her original rig, and in 1989 was awarded the highest level of historic recognition in the United States as a U.S. National Historic Landmark, 1989. 91-92, the ship was turned over to Sound Experience. It's a nonprofit organization that was started by a former Clearwater captain a program started by famed folk musician and activist Pete Seeger, developing environmental education on the Hudson River. And Morley Horder decided he wanted to come back to his home waters in Puget Sound and start a similar program out there, with that idea that you won't take care of anything that you don't have a connection to. So bringing students, as many students as you can, out on the water to then care for the environment. You'll notice the blue flag up there. Adventurous was the first U.S. Vessel enrolled in the Blue Flag program. And we're engaged in formal environmental and sustainability education, mostly with youth, but all the way up through to elders and corporate groups and the like. The nonprofit owns and operates the organization, again, for the last 25 years. We serve 3,000 to 5,000 participants each year in formal environmental education programs, upwards of 10,000 with festivals and dockside tours and the like that are engaged in the ship. And you notice a very specific mission: engaging, inspiring, and empowering an inclusive community to make a difference for the future of Puget Sound. Each time the ship is underway, actually all year long, even through our restoration periods, we're engaged in formal environmental education and awareness. So very mission-driven organization and ship. So the idea was, as part of this the strategic plan process that came through, is ensure that a 50-year standard of the ship restoration through the completion of what's the Centennial Restoration Project. We're coming up on 100 years, about 5 years ago, and we launched formally into the Centennial Restoration Project. Now, the ship is committed to work 200 days a year, and so we can only do our restoration in 4-month periods. So real quickly, the extent of work that we've done over the last 5 years, we have one project left to do to finish the starboard side of the ship, and she'll meet that 50-year standard. So extensive amount of work getting done over the last 5 years to ensure that she continues to sail. I'm speaking to this particularly because this idea of sustainability is not just green technology, but it's actually working into the future. And in the strategic planning process, you'll notice specifically this value, really widely held value of modeling low impact sustainable living on board the ship. And that's something that the organization has taken quite seriously for the last number of years. And there's a whole host of current best management practices that we've been involved in, supporting the Blue Flag program, looking really closely at our energy needs. We're engaged in this, this kind of experiment with eco bottom paint in coordination with Pettit Paint. Washington State in the U.S. is the first state and the only state to phase out and ban copper-based bottom paint. And we're exempt from that particular law, but we're using the ship as an opportunity to learn about how it's working on wooden vessels. So right now, with a brand new port side and a starboard side yet to do, we painted half the ship with water-based, eco-based bottom paint. And when I haul the boat out next week, when I get home, we'll have this great side-by-side comparison. One of the few things that we do. All of our wood products, last year was 240 frame sections, 2,000 lineal feet of planking. All of that wood is FSC certified, Forest Stewardship Council. It's a widely recognized international certification process for wood harvested from sustainable sources. And then certainly the ship's engaged in environmental sustainability education. So all of this are great best management practices. We're engaged in kind of helping to try and move the industry forward and be a model for sustainability in the Blue Flag program. But we got to the point where we wanted to go further. where we wanted to look at how the ship moves forward into its next century, being an absolute model for sustainable and emerging technology. And so if you look at the land-built side of the green building industry, it's really quite well organized. So if you were to do a Google search, if you wanted to build a green home or a green building, you do a Google search, green building. In the first 3 hits, you would find a tremendous amount, all the information that you would need in terms of technology, architects and engineers, all that you would need to be a built home. If you did the same in the marine industry, you'd be hard-pressed to find much at all. So we start asking these questions. If we want to be the greenest ship in the world, based on a historic platform, what technology is available, where is it being done, and as project manager, these are all the questions I'm asking. Where do I find this information? Who supports this? And really, you're not going to find anything. And so the idea kind of came to mind is how do we, in the maritime industry, broadly now, not just the sail training industry, get more organized around green building and emerging technology? Now, it's not to say that great stuff isn't happening out there, and there are some really great examples, but they're hard-pressed to find. I was fortunate enough at that point to be awarded a fellowship through Toyota, which gave me the opportunity to work on a year-long project engaging in some of these questions. And what I started was this process what we called where blue meets green. The idea was that we brought together leaders in the maritime industry in our region to talk specifically about what they're doing to move forward green technology in the maritime industry. And who we are having these conversations with is across the board. These are manufacturers, these are large and small shipyards and boat builders, these are large container ships, these are paint manufacturers, suppliers, the ports themselves, tribal fisheries, all coming together to talk about what is, these are all early adopters, what is the burgeoning new green industry in the maritime world. Very structured, facilitated conversations. These are happening over a series of 12 months, various different ports, on board the Adventurous and other conferences. What do we envision? How do we accomplish it? And how is it that we start to collaborate around a more sustainable green maritime industry? There's a whole series of highlights that came out of these conversations. There's over 200 leaders in the industry, mostly in the Puget Sound region, although I went outside the region a little bit as well. First and foremost was skills and education. How is it that we support a new industry without giving folks working in the marine trades or upcoming naval architects and engineers some background and skills? So who's going to install this brand new green, all new refrigeration technology, right? Who's installing the new battery technology, propulsion technology? The skills aren't there yet. Understanding the issues for sure. We live in these different watersheds and we know that there's a microplastics issue, ocean acidification, these things keep coming up all the time. What is it about the maritime industry that's actually contributing to that? We don't know entirely. Or maybe it's not the worst offender of the issue of inland waters of the Baltic Sea or the Puget Sound. The maritime industry may not be the worst offender, but what are the issues? Where are the models and how do we share them? Who's doing this kind of work and how do we make them accessible to others that want to continue it? And what are the standards? In the US and internationally, we have LEED standards in the green building industry. And there are those within the naval architect and marine engineering community with IMO and ABS and the like that are trying to come up with green standards, voluntary green LEED-like standards for the maritime industry. You can imagine how difficult that is because you have everything from us, these sail training vessels, to containers, to cruise ships, to the recreational boating community. So those standards are going to be quite varied, and that's a difficult process to come up with. And then advocacy. Again, so who's looking out for this? Who's pushing it? Who's helping to support funding mechanisms for this kind of thing? Not any of this is yet coordinated. What was interesting in all these series of conversations was that there were clear notions that collaborative approaches are working. The maritime industry is quite interdependent. Shipyards next to each other are utilizing each other all the time. There's a direct connection between manufacturers and suppliers and others. But how do we start to collaborate with that interdependence across the industry? So where this process has led is actually Washington Sea Grant, the Sea Grant process, which is funded by NOAA in the U.S. federal government, is now taking over this continued process. We're building an advisory board and essentially looking towards the green building councils as a model in the maritime industry. And task force are coming together and trying to figure out what the priorities are going to be, and on an industry-wide, start changing the conversation and supporting green technology in the industry. And then there's building models and pilot programs, and that's where Sound Experience and Adventurous is jumping in with both feet. It's something that we are calling the Living Ship Initiative. We are looking to use the Schooner Adventurous, the National Historic Platform, to be a model, an experimental model in using the highest standards of green building in the maritime industry. And we've chosen a process called the Living Building Challenge. This is something that has been put on by an organization called the International Living Future Institute. It is the world's most stringent green building standard. And it's being utilized across the world. There are living buildings. The greenest commercial building in the world was just built to these standards in Seattle. There are buildings in Australia. There are buildings in Poland, Bulgaria, UK, around the world. This challenge is being taken up. And they're incredibly stringent. And they're stringent to the point where at first glance you would say this is impossible. And that's kind of the idea. The idea is that we start shifting thinking about how we deal with the built environment. It rewards early adopters. It's creating models for the future. It's stirring the pot. Again, the idea is that you can't do that. Well, actually we can, and let's see how it gets done. Pulls the market forward. And different from a lot of the other green building standards, it really infuses this idea of beauty and inspiration. It uses this flower as a metaphor. There are 7 specific performance areas, or petals that they call them. First is around sight, so getting an idea about what is the site, what's the environment around you that you're going to affect. That's going to be quite different for a ship out at sea or even an inland boat than it is for a stationary building. And those are some interesting questions that we're asking. The goal is to get to net zero water, that these structures are capturing all the 100% of their water needs, so none of these buildings are tied into municipal water systems. Net zero energy, it's producing all the energy that it needs right there. And zero combustion, which when we say stir the pot and start rethinking about how we deal with that. Now that's a lot easier for us because we are the world's first hybrid, right? Sail power. And then we're talking about some really interesting models and how we may go forward. Keen eye to health, air, sound qualities, living conditions. Materials is a big one. So we started thinking about all the materials that we use in buildings that we're using on board our ships. There's a whole list, these 13 chemicals that are restricted from being used at all. PVC is one of them. HCFCs, essentially the refrigerants and the like, that are huge greenhouse gases. And that's a difficult process. So they have to fit all of our regulations. In the U.S. it's the CFRs and IMO standards and the like. Now there are some exceptions based on that, but that's one of the more difficult processes. That there's a clear access and education, and then that there's beauty involved. And I don't think we have a problem covering that on board the ship. What's really interesting about this process is that it's a tool for change, let alone just a standard. A lot of buildings go through the LEED process and they get a sticker on the window that says, this is a green building, done. That's not the point of this. The point is to actually pull the market forward. If the technology doesn't exist, then it's your responsibility to meet the living building criteria. If the technology doesn't exist yet and you can't install it, then it is your responsibility to do advocacy either with municipalities or technology manufacturers to advocate for technology to change or for regulation to change to support it. It's actually illegal to build most living buildings in the U.S. In the state of Colorado, you're not allowed to capture any water. It's illegal to capture water. So there's regulation that's going to be involved in this as well. And we're working quite closely with our U.S. inspection team in how this is going to work as well. This process has now been funded over the next 3 years. We have a series of funders that are funding this planning process. You can imagine this is going to be a multi-year incremental approach to change the ship. We're looking at retrofitting the entire ship system. Everything from propulsion, black water, cooking, heating, everything is going to have to meet this new standard. So this is going to be an incremental phased-in approach. we're committed to sail, those 200 days a year, and as well as how we do fundraising, we're going to have to do this in an incremental stage. So one of the first goals there is we have to go through this design process, and I have a team of architects and engineers and operators that meet monthly, and we're going through each system and redesigning the system. We're doing demonstration projects along the way, so we can start speaking to the industry, start speaking to our participants about kind of the work and technology we're starting to use. We're looking at how the technology incorporates into our environmental education program, working with other education foundations around the country, around the world, and how they're using technology as a basis for learning about environmental ed. And marine trades workforce development. So we have the opportunity to work with existing marine trades programs to start building an education paradigm around it. Like I said, our design team is meeting monthly. We're working on a series of these demonstration projects. We have a new rainwater reclamation, the bottom plate I spoke about. We're moving away from zinc sacrificial anodes and moving towards aluminum. And this was our first year, and so I'm eager and anxious. I dove on them this summer, and they were looking great. I would highly recommend looking into aluminum anodes. And zinc is a difficult chemical for the marine environment. Disassembling this very unsafe and old 120 DC system that we've had on board for a long time, converting all over to LED lights. There's a little bit of money invested, but the price in LED are coming down so much, it makes no sense not to have LED lights on board your ship. And the big project that we're working on this winter is an all-new refrigeration system. It's the largest energy draw on board the ship, and we're using new technology. We are using, what we're designing right now are vacuum sealed with the technology called aerogel for insulation. You get an R50 factor in 1 inch, where some of the 4 and 6 inch insulation, you might get an R15. So incredible savings that you find just in insulation, as well as all the materials using in all new compressors, water-cooled compressors and the like. And then all of the wiring and plumbing is going to have to meet red list issues. So PVC-free coverings and wiring, the plumbing issues that we're using, the refrigerant that we're using, all has to meet these red list standards. So this is our big systems project that we're starting to work with this coming winter. We're developing new education. We're working with our education team as we're developing our new education standards and how we incorporate this into the formal education programs we're doing. And we did a pilot project this last fall, and we're building on it this winter, where we're starting to use the ship to enhance existing marine trade skills. So we have folks that are learning how to be systems designers, installers, and shipyard workers, and teaching them about best management practices, the new technology that's coming through, and how to work with it. We did a 3-day program with a series of students in a trades program and start engaging it. And this refrigeration program, this pilot program this coming winter, is students from various programs are actually going to be using the ship as a lab for their EPA and ABYC certified courses in refrigeration. This design team we've put together, meeting monthly, again, it's a series of different operators and marine architects and engineers. A whole group, there's actually 4 different naval architect and marine engineering firms that are serving on a collaborative design team. So these are all firms who are early adopters and find that sustainable and green technology are being called for. They're leading the industry, and they're working collaboratively with us together to kind of use this. It's a low-risk experimental platform for them, but we're getting all of the benefits of their expertise and their time and energy in putting this team together. This is the drawing back to the original interior of the ship, and you notice the many different lives of the ship, the many different iterations. You can imagine the systems as well. We have a nonprofits organizations owning and operating the ship over the last couple of years, leading to just a hodgepodge of crazy systems, sometimes even dumpster dived for parts. And so this mess of systems on board, we're now moving and organizing everything. So going through each of the petals of the Living Building Challenge, organizing taking a tremendous amount of data that our engineers, our onboard engineers have been going through over the years, and putting them in an organized way so we can start looking at what the needs of the ship is within our general operating parameters and redesigning systems to those. This is taking a tremendous amount of work of our design team. The fun thing that we did just a couple weeks ago, we finished our sailing season, and we downrigged for the season, and what we're looking at is what the propulsion is going to look like in the next couple of years, and we're going to need to move towards an electric propulsion. Some sort of electric, hybrid drive, diesel electric, whatever it is we're going to have to move towards, and it's going to be incremental to move away from combustion altogether. But what do we need? What size motor are we going to need? What's the battery bank that's going to be involved? What's the backup generator going to look like? And we can do those calculations theoretically based on our tonnage and water line and the like, but nobody's been getting actual pull tests about what it's going to take. And so we actually towed the ship at hull speed, 11.5 knots, with this meter on it, checking pounds of pressure that it takes to actually move the ship and comparing them to the RPM and speed test data that we have for the Gray Marine 671 that's in it right now. So now we have actual data that we can start building systems based on in propulsion. This is an incredible form where we can look at what speed do we need to pull the ship, what's the battery draw going to be, so how long can we go silent based on what different kind of battery configurations we use. It's an incredible tool. So the process that's going to continue is we have our monthly design team meetings. We're building continued pilot programs. We're going through the new installations. We're continuing to talk about it. And the goal is that by June 2014, we have a complete system redesign for the ship. Now again, we're going to have to figure out how that goes incrementally as well. A lot of the systems on board are so interrelated. We have a diesel cook stove on board. That diesel cook stove, not only we use it for cooking, for baking and the like, but it also heats our hot water, and it's also the main heat source for the ship. And so once we get rid of that diesel cook stove, there's a tremendous amount of other systems that are going to be involved. So again, the interdependence, whole system design and thinking that's going to go along with it, and at what points do we take on these different projects is a key component to that process. So I wanted to take the opportunity to engage back with you all. Thinking specifically about the Blue Flag scheme, those best management practices that STI is looking to adopt, and I really applaud the interest and the commitment of STI to move in this direction. But it seems to me that us, working on the water every day, already having a platform of education, sometimes formal environmental education, or just direct sail training, do we not have the opportunity, or maybe some would say even the responsibility, to be pushing the industry in this manner, to be models in sustainable technology for the industry and for the thousands of people that come sailing on our ships every year and the millions of people that come see the ships each year. And so I wanted to kind of pose the questions back to you all in terms of your already involvement with the Blue Flag scheme, the work that you're doing on board the ship now or not, and what could be the role of sail training to start moving the industry forward in these kind of questions and topics. So I'll leave that back to you all. Whether you have specific questions about the Blue Flag scheme and how it's working, specifically about any of the best management practices to meet the Blue Flag scheme, or going further about what it's going to take to kind of push the industry, pulling the market forward, changing technology, dealing with regulation as we build new models.